everyone, it's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland Reviewer, and welcome to the Wasteland, my weekly show where I take a deep dive into a particular film. And we're in the home stretch, people. Three more
16.
Scorsese. And I actually have somebody out after, and we're going to be doing some Spielberg, but I have Aaron here, one of our editors from SiftPop. So Aaron, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, happy to be on. I always love excuses to watch movies that are on my watch list. And man, Silence is one of those I've been wanting to watch for a while again. But
yeah, because you weren't one of the 5 people like myself who saw it in theaters.
I wanted to. It just wasn't anywhere near me.
We could talk at length about how much they botched the release of this movie.
Man,
because
this should have had a Best Picture nomination, but we'll get there.
It's like, hey Marty, can we fit this into December? Yeah. Let's drop a trailer in mid-November and be like, come see Silence. And then no, nobody saw it. Which
$36 million budget. Yep.
Because to confirm, as I go back to my 2016 list of all the movies that I saw, this was my #1 film of 2016.
Wow.
And
all right.
I love this film and I was looking forward to checking this out again. But before we get into the actual feature film, I'm going to let Aaron shamelessly plug whatever he would like to shamelessly plug.
Yeah, I guess we'll just do the SiftPop Writers Room podcast. If whatever podcasts are bought. You can also buy SiftPop. It's free. For clarification, SiftPop Writers Room podcast. Kind of a connection, kind of a tie-in, but Robert and I will be talking about Last Temptation of Christ in a little under a month, and I've not seen it. Interesting tie-in. So
yes,
definitely happy that I revisited Silence around the time that I'll also be watching that because Scorsese religious stuff. So
it's part of his trilogy with Kundun in the middle, and also, as I pointed out when I did my George Harrison Living in the Material World episode with my friends Alex and Jim, I feel like that's kind of like a cousin to his faith-based trilogy, because talk a lot about faith when it comes to George Harrison. But if you're interested, you all should go check out my episode with my friend Alex talking about Last Temptation of Christ, because that is such a fascinating film to talk about. And I'm definitely going to be checking out what you and Robert have to say about it.
Oh man, I'm so excited, but also just nervous how that conversation is going to go. Similarly, today.
Yes, and because this film, and before we get into it, obviously I do my coming attractions, but this is an interesting approach to Christianity and how it's perceived around the world and faith and everything. So, but with our coming attractions, April Fool's Day. So neither of us picked Morbius. Let's just get that out of the room. And because sitting pretty at a 19%, I think, on Rotten Tomatoes. Yikes. But Aaron, what was the movie that you picked that you're most excited about?
Yeah, I mean, I figured The Bubble is probably going to be that one. Mm-hmm. A film that I'd never heard of. By the way, Morbius currently it's 17%, so it's dropped.
Oh, it's dropping.
Yep. Look, The Bubble, right? It seems decent, right? I haven't seen the trailer. I really didn't know about it until you said it, but you started saying some things, and I'm like, all right, I could watch that.
Well, it's one of those weird weekends where Richard Linklater and a Judd Apatow movie are both dropping on Netflix,
and nobody's talking about them.
Sucks. How are you having 2 very famous modern directors dropping movies the same weekend and nobody knows about them?
Well, and let's get the reason why I picked The Bubble is not just because Judd Apatow, but Karen Gillan, Pedro Pascal, Leslie Mann, David Duchovny, Keegan-Michael Key, Fred Armisen, Kate McKinnon. This is surely enough that people should. Maria Bakalova, this might be their first big thing since Borat 2. Benedict Cumberbatch apparently in here. How have I never heard of this?
Because Netflix.
Yeah, because Netflix, right?
Because Netflix doesn't know how to promote anything unless it's Stranger Things or Bridgerton. That's basically it.
Yeah,
Had to
fair.
hear about Bridgerton 2 coming out for like months and months and months and months. But like you have a Richard Linklater and a Judd Apatow movie coming out in a day of us recording this, and it's just like, yeah, like I had no idea it was even a Richard Linklater movie, Apollo 10 and a half, until I got the screener from Netflix, and I'm like, wait, what?
Man, streamers got to figure out how to advertise their stuff better. Because, like, I mean, we were talking about this with now Best Picture winner Coda when it first
Yeah,
came out. Like, I'd only heard of it because it was clipped in front of Ted Lasso. Like,
yeah.
the trailer was like. Other than that, it would have probably just completely missed my radar until nominations. Like, you know.
Apple TV Plus's whole entire system is everybody watch Ted Lasso. Let's throw our trailers in front of it.
Well, but now that they've put out Coda, like,
Yeah, they won a Best Picture. Look at Apple. Apple coming for you.
right.
And
Who would have
my
thought
pick,
that?
huh?
Who would have thought Apple would be the first streamer to win? And
Well, and not to go off on a tangent, but wasn't technically Nomadland a Hulu film?
I think technically it was released limited in theaters. It just like was only wide on Hulu.
So, like, are they saying it's not a Hulu original? It just got its
Correct.
streaming debut on Hulu?
I think technically, and I look, it to me, if you ask me, it's a Hulu original. But it's not marketed as Hulu original because I don't think Hulu produced the film. I think they bought the rights after it
Well,
was
that's
made,
interesting
and it
because
was
they did the same.
premiering
Apple did the
elsewhere.
same thing with Coda.
Well, but I don't know. I think they're just trying not to brand it as Hulu original because I think it did premiere elsewhere, and I think the contract probably stipulates that Hulu doesn't own it entirely, but it only owns it for only owns streaming rights for, let's say, a year. I don't know.
Nobody wants to think about the 2020 Oscars anyway, so that's
Right.
why it's just like,
Whereas like with Apple
exist.
TV Plus, like Apple TV Plus owns all of the rights to Coda. Like I don't think it's the same with Hulu Nomadland. And
That
like I
makes
said, I'm pretty sure it was out for a couple weeks exclusively in some theaters. So
well, like it played in some theaters in November and December, which was like the weird thing because I know Vinny, who works with SiftPop occasionally too. He and like Vinny and I have been friends for like God, like 12 years. He saw it in a theater in like December.
Yep.
So, and then it didn't come out on actual Hulu. But anyway, enough about streaming services. So my pick actually was You Won't Be Alone. And this is a new horror film from director Goran Stovalevsky. And it's starring Noomi Rapace as...
That's the original girl with the dragon tattoo?
Yes.
Okay.
And this is a witch story, unlike what you've probably seen before. It looks like a Malick film. And
I'm out.
It looks like one. Looks like one. I'm just putting it that way. And it focuses on a baby being kidnapped by like this ancient spirit who turns her into a witch. And then when she gets the opportunity to like take on the life of an actual human, she's trying to like see like, I kind of like living like a human again, kind of thing. So it's a lot more of a drama than it is horror, but like it gets creepy too. So it kind of balances those things. And I was very excited when I saw the trailer for it. I've seen it already. But like it's the kind of thing where it's like I remember seeing the trailer, I'm like, this looks interesting. A lot more interesting than Morbius, also about like classic horror movie monsters. So like I'd rather go watch this witch movie than go watch that vampire movie. So there you go. But you know, Morbius is finally releasing, so that means I don't have to watch that trailer ever again. So woohoo!
There you go.
That's my main thing why I'm happy that Morbius released, because I couldn't watch that trailer anymore. I don't know how many times I've actually seen it. But
many.
What we're really here to talk about is Silence. So Aaron, why did you want to come on for the Silence episode?
Yeah, kind of like we alluded to a little bit earlier. I saw Silence in 2016. It was one of those like they didn't come to theaters anywhere near me, and this is like before the days of things being on digital, before they were on physical. So like there was no like early access where I could buy it or whatever. You know, not even just to rent, but to buy. It came out on Vudu iTunes the same day that it did on DVD and Blu-ray. So I picked it up like immediately on Blu-ray, and watched it like within a week. I mean, it's a long movie.
Mhm.
And I don't even think the Blu-ray had a very wide release, but my Best Buy happened to have one. So I picked it up, and I remember really loving it, but also like it's not a movie that is pleasant to watch, but it's a movie that like is meant to just kind of gestate in your soul.
Mhm.
And so one that you can't really revisit too often. And not really one that you even want to revisit often, but one that you think about often. So
Yeah.
it's been 2016 was, I guess, 6 years ago now. It's been 6 years since I've seen it. Probably actually pretty accurate because I'm sure the Blu-ray came out about this time. It's
Mhm.
been 6 years, and like, man, I've wanted to rewatch this one. And I feel like doing a show like Welcome to the Wasteland is a great excuse to rewatch a film, or to watch for the first time the film.
Yeah, and then you get to have a conversation about it.
Yeah. Oh, buddy.
And and when I saw this, I went into watching this movie and like Hell or High Water had been my number one movie of 2016 since August. I was like, that blew me away. I'm a huge fan of Westerns and stuff like that. And when I sat and watched this movie, I was not expecting this to like hit me as hard as it did. And then I was sitting there, I think I was like maybe one of two people in the theater sitting and watching this. Because boy, did they do a horrible job advertising this movie, because they literally dropped trailers a month and a half before it came out. And but the trailers were cool. Like the music in the trailer, I'm like, oh my God, this
Yeah.
is intense. And watching the film blew me away. And I've thought about it on and off for 6 years now. And this was actually the second time I watched it. So I hadn't watched it since. And so what the story we have here is we have Andrew Garfield and Adam Driver playing Jesuit priests who are sent to go find their mentor, played by Liam Neeson, who is contractually obligated to only appear in Martin Scorsese movies for like 15 minutes max.
Pretty much.
So if he's in one, not in it a lot.
Well, because he's Gangs of New York for very little time. Is there another one I'm missing?
No, that's the main one.
Okay.
Like
I
Priest
didn't
Fallon.
know.
Like,
I mean, because he's in so little that you could convince me he was in like 5 minutes of Taxi Driver. Like,
well, and he's still like, I'm convinced like I would have loved to see an actual film about him and Bill the Butcher.
yeah.
Because that's how much that opening scene makes an impact. And in this film, I think one of the so like they go to Japan to try to find their mentor, which there's a lot of rumors that he's taken Japanese name and a wife and shunned his religion. And it is a battle of faith. And because a lot of it is about going out and trying to convert the Japanese people from Buddhism to Christianity. And it's basically the whole entire film's a giant tug of war between the Jesuits and the Buddhists. And watching this film for the second time and 6 years of like more cinephile activity for me, I'm sitting and watching this film. I'm like, one of the most interesting things I've noticed about Scorsese's films up to this point is how much of a student of like the game he is. And there's certain films where it's like you watch Shutter Island and Cape Fear and he watched Hitchcock. And watching especially the opening of this movie, I'm like, oh my God, this is a Kurosawa film. And it like felt like one. And I've watched so many Kurosawa films since I've seen this for the first time. I had not picked up on that at all.
Mm-hmm.
And like the opening narration and how everything shot, I'm just like, wait a minute. So like, and it makes sense with like the setting and everything too, being Japan and this being like an ode to a Kurosawa film. And this is a gorgeous film. Gorgeous. And like, this was interesting because this is the second film that Rodrigo Prieto did as cinematographer for Scorsese after Robert Richardson was his cinematographer for like 20 years. And that's the one Oscar nom that this movie got was like cinematography. And
I'll complain about that later.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. But Aaron, what are some of the things that stood out to you most that you liked about this film?
All right. I think for the first time ever, I'm going to say this in a positive tone, but this movie is a 2 hour and 40-minute movie, and it feels it. Um, I want to say it in a positive tone because this movie's objective is to talk about suffering and specifically how we choose to deal with suffering. So while sure, it feels like a drag, and honestly, it feels longer than 2 hours and 40 minutes, like it's supposed to. You're supposed to feel every second of Andrew Garfield's character, Rodriguez, sorry, like suffering and feeling the pain and feeling the torture and seeing the Christians of Japan suffer. So I think that's where I want to start. Is just I think this is how you justify a long run time, other than shoving in a ton of plot. This is supposed to be a long and brooding movie because it's about a long and brooding trial, if you want to call it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the thing too, because like what was interesting for me too is there's interesting use of levity in this movie at times, where it's just like I actually laughed a couple times watching this movie. I'm just like I think that was one of the things that I forgot about it since the first time that I had watched it. But like Scorsese knows how to pace a film.
Yeah,
I feel like that's like you have Wolf of Wall Street that does not feel like it's 3 hours, but like it is pounding you for 3 hours. This film is contemplative. It's like it's the whole, and you get really introspective here and compare it to something in the film. At one point, how they torture some of the people is hanging them upside down with their heads cased in the ground and have like a little cut the back of their neck so the blood doesn't fully rush to their head. This feels like that little cut of that blood just trickling, and just slowly draining Andrew Garfield's character throughout this whole entire film. I do have to say though, luckily Liam Neeson did not attempt to actually do an accent in this movie, which I thought that was like, they're not the strongest accents that they do in this movie. I'm like, at this point they probably could have just had them not do one. But that's the thing though, the performances in this film, like think about in 2022, you have a movie with Andrew Garfield and Adam Driver carrying your movie. Oh my God, they're both fantastic.
This was even a big deal in 2016 because Garfield had done the 2 Spider-Man movies. He had done Social Network. Hacksaw Ridge was getting ready to come out. Actually had come out by the time this movie had come out. It was just, this was filmed first. And Adam Driver, I mean, he had been in Girls, but he hadn't quite, I don't think, broken into the mainstream yet, because I'm not quite sure what that role was.
Well, I mean, Force Awakens came out a year before this.
I thought Force Awakens was 17. No, you're right. It was 15. 17 was Last Jedi. Yeah, all right, so there you go. But you wouldn't have recognized his face because he is in the Kylo Ren mask the entire movie, except for the scene where he kills Han Solo. Well, most of the movie, I think. Anyway.
Yeah, most of the movie, he has a mask on.
I don't know that he was super, household name just quite yet, but Garfield was. I just don't think he was still in that like trying to recover from Spider-Man phase, and like because people had only seen him as Spider-Man, even though he had done the Social Network before, and he had done Hacksaw Ridge had come out, so it's like, oh, like this guy's the real deal, not just the real deal as Peter Parker, but like this guy's going to be like an Oscar-winning actor one day.
Well, and what's interesting is he got nominated for Best Actor for Hacksaw Ridge, and then everybody slept on this movie.
Right. And look, all right, we're talking about the performances now for a little bit. I think they're all three really good in this role, in their respective roles, the 3 mains, as well as I think the interpreter, who I don't know his name off the top of my head, but I know he plays Raiden in last year's Mortal Kombat.
Tadanobu Asano. And that's where I recognized him from. His voice was so familiar. I'm like, wait a minute.
But His face is familiar too. I feel like I've seen him in 10 or 12 things.
Oh yeah, he's Hogan too in Thor.
Oh yeah, all right, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he and he just reminds me so much of Ken Watanabe, which they wanted for the role. So they just, they're all really great, but like I kind of still prefer the Andrew Garfield in Hacksaw Ridge.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's because it's a little more showy. I mean, there's definitely moments of this movie that get like, you can tell Oscar real, like with the scene where he's drinking from the stream and sees the reflection and starts laughing like a crazy person.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's definitely those moments, but and like Adam Driver is excellent in the scene, his death scene. Spoiler. And
we
Liam
spoil
Neeson,
all these movies, so
yeah.
There you go.
Liam Neeson is great in his role as well. I don't know. There's something like, to me, like I didn't necessarily remember the acting about this movie. I remember the cinematography and what the movie's trying to say. Whereas Hacksaw Ridge lives and dies on Andrew Garfield's performance. And to me, it thrives. I love Hacksaw Ridge.
I do too. Hacksaw Ridge was my... Where is it? Hacksaw Ridge was really high up there for me too. It was my number 10, right behind The Nice Guys.
Yeah, man. Look, 2016 was a stacked year. Like, and
yeah, looking in hindsight, I'm like, there's a lot of great movies that came out in 2016.
So, like, there's a lot that have made my top 100. I mean, and there's a lot that, like, I feel like any of these could be Best Picture winners. What was the Best Picture winner that year? That was Moonlight. And like La La Land would be Cliff, but like you couldn't be wrong. Like Arrival would have been an excellent pick. If this were nominated, this would have been a great pick. Hacksaw Ridge could have been a great pick. Manchester by the Sea. It wouldn't have, they didn't get nominated, but like Edge of 17, Sing Street would both be good picks.
Yep.
Hell or High Water. Man, like Hunt for the Wilder People.
Yep. I was so happy Hell or High Water
this,
got nominated for Best Picture. I'm like,
this year is just awesome. And like I said kind of at the top, like it's a shame this movie didn't get nominated for Best Picture. Look, The Nice Guys are my favorite movie of all time, but like I wouldn't have given it Best Picture. I think because I think there's a difference. But like La La Land or Arrival, like it's really hard to beat those two. I think those are both in my top 5 of all time. Like,
yeah, this is like, I think watching this a second time, I had such a great appreciation for the Japanese actors in this film too.
Yeah, they're all great.
There's so, and the Inquisitor, that guy,
he's like, got this like really patronizing tone that it's just so effective.
Yes. Like
he talks to Andrew Garfield like he's a child.
That one reveal where he's like, I'm Inoue. And it's just like, oh crap. And you're just like, he's like, I want to speak to the Inquisitor. It's like, I am him. And it's just like, oh no. And the one particular character, Kichijiro, who's the one who keeps sinning and can't help himself, and then asks for forgiveness so vehemently, but then does the same thing over and over and over again. And that, like, this movie is so layered in how it portrays religion and faith. And like, this is definitely one of the most deeply thematic films that came out that year. There's so much to process here. And it's so interesting because it takes shots at like, because like obviously the biggest focal point of this film is, you know, Christianity going around the world and trying to tell people it's like, you should have my religion instead of yours. And I think one of the most impactful scenes in this film is where you finally see Liam Neeson towards the end of the film, and they do such a great job of building him up from that far shot of him slowly walking down, and like you can tell it's him because he's like a foot taller than like half the people in this movie. And when he's like ripping down their expectation of what the Japanese people being Christians really is, and where they're not really believing.
Right.
and they're not putting in the work. And like you have, Garupe gets really frustrated about that too. Adam Driver's character, that it's
Mm-hmm.
like, I think the one scene with that couple whose child is baptized is like, so we're in paradise now, right? It's just like, no, it's not how this works.
Well, and it's like you can feel that frustration from within him because they're trying to get Rodriguez to apostate, and he he refuses to, based off his personal conviction. But we see all these people that have been through his life that they're like they're hanging in the pit, and they're like, you're supposed to care for them. But they've all renounced their faith already. Like we're still torturing them for you. Like it's like, man, like this is something. Look, probably should have started off here. I was born and raised Christian, still am. Couldn't tell by the cross, obviously, which wasn't intended when we set up this office. It's just that's where it fits. But like I'm an ordained minister as well, and like this is things that like I wrestle with, like for work, is like seeing these kind of people and seeing their actions play out and seeing if it gets tough. I mean, it's interesting for that first group, like because they're really strong, they're really, they really stick through it. But you see progressively, like people stick to it less and less and less and less and less, to eventually like it's so easy for them to, you see so much resistance in that first group where they wind up hanging them to crosses in the ocean to drown, which, man. And then in the scene right before that, like they're unwilling to spit on the cross, and then just later, but they're willing to step on the plate of Jesus. But like it just feels like it gets easier and easier and easier, and like they're really breaking down the spirit of like, because that's the only thing that they can do, is like, we have to crush his spirit. That's how we win. And like they succeed for Liam Neeson, kind of. I don't know. I think we could talk about that for a little bit.
Well, and I think, and to loop this back to Silence, is they think that they broke his spirit, they think that they broke his faith. But what's so powerful and impactful about the ending of this movie is that he lived by his faith in silence, and never acknowledging it, never talking to anybody about it, but it never went away. And I think that, like, that last shot with his hands like this, like, I remember sitting in the theater being like, oh, wow.
Because it really makes you question, by the time you get to the end of the film, did they break him? And then that last shot confirms no. He had to live by their rules, but no. And there's even like the scene where the person that's betrayed him several times, and this is part of what I was also saying with, like, I interact with these people on a regular basis, of people that, like, make the worst possible decisions and then, want to come back for forgiveness every time they mess up. And you're just like you don't get it. Like, you're supposed to grow from this. Like, you're not supposed to just like do the same thing again. Yeah, it's interesting seeing that scene where he comes and confesses and Rodriguez hears the voice of Jesus. Like, that's where you're like, all right, so we think if he was broken, this just restored him, but like, how is he going to respond? And he responds with silence.
And this is going to sound like a silly comparison, but it reminds me of that clip from The Office where Michael, like, when Pam's just like, stop dating my mother, he's like, I'm going to date your mother harder. It's just like, that's basically Andrew Garfield's like, no, I'm going to have even harder faith. And that's the thing, because, like, can you imagine the amount of faith and devotion that you have to commit to your faith and not be able to talk about it, not be able to show it, and that just being completely introspective for decades? Because, like, Rodriguez lived to an older man, And him being able to do that and hold that in and still be that committed to it and putting on that facade for all that time.
Well, and the thing that's even more impressive about that is not just, staying in silence and not acting on it, but like keeping it through silence. Like it is so difficult to try to act out faith in isolation. We've known this about whatever spirituality for so long. Like even monks, like it's kind of a like there's still a community of monks, and there's still like a lot of times it's on terms, depending on traditions and whatnot. Like, but it's it's just so interesting. Like that's his true strength is the Japanese think they've won.
Yep.
But they haven't. But they kind of also do. Like it's not a happy ending. Like, gosh, but it's so many of these. Man, I wanted to write down just every quote that just is like, how are they only just going to say that and let that be? Like, I feel like you could write a whole doctoral thesis on this one statement. Like, and you could, it's where they're talking about at the very end of you should you should take solace that we are letting people continue to be Christian or whatever. And then he's like, well, nothing grows in a swamp. They're calling Japan a swamp. And it's like, it's not a happy time, but like, it's not a happy ending, but there's truth to that, in that he's in a swamp and nothing grows in a swamp. And so we don't see him grow, but we see him survive. And that's incredibly hard to do in a swamp. Shut up now.
Well, and it is very true because, like, he died not being able to live his truth outward.
I wonder about this.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this is a good time we could just bring this up. So the wife is at least aware of the existence of the cross because she places it in his casket, box, barrel, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think he continued to privately prophesy, or do you think it was one of those she just had a respect for his commitment? Especially because, like, the situation that he's brought into is this person died, you're just going to take his identity. Mm-hmm. Like, we don't see what the relationship is like with the wife. Does he remain celibate and, to the priestly order? I mean, he refers to himself as a fallen priest, but does he still try to remain other than, publicly denouncing for the sake of surviving and for others' sake? I wonder about that. And there's also a moment, just a hint, but do you think that Liam Neeson lives the same way? Because there's the moment at the end where they're inspecting all the items and he says, our faith. And now it could be a force of habit. It could be a slip of the tongue, right? He said for however many years, in terms of hour. And he says, did I? I doubt it. Like, is that him trying to cover his own butt? Or is he living in the same way? Did the Japanese not actually break him either? And maybe almost giving permission for Garfield to just kind of let go a little bit and say, like, your personal strength is winning. You don't need to win over the country, but you surviving is a win for the kingdom. Like, what do you think?
I could definitely see that. And because, like, the thing is, like, there's a level of still passion that I feel like I sense from Liam Neeson's character Ferreira when he's so frustrated at, like, pointing out the sun. Like, they see it so literally. They don't understand this. They're not believing in what you're preaching. They're believing in a warped sense of this. And I feel like on some level, he still cares. And that's why I feel like I could believe that he is in that same situation. And because, they kept reminding us the whole entire movie, he was the strongest of them. Mm-hmm. Like, he was their mentor. And, like, I could see him also having that will to just live that life and have the Japanese believe that he's living that life. But is he really?
Mm.
And like obviously they're much more explicit with Andrew Garfield's character
Right.
Rodriguez at the end, because like that's basically like, yeah, this is what happened.
I think it's all open to interpretation. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think there's any definitive way you can answer this question.
Well, and I think the film works better for that.
Right. And
Because like, and let's put in perspective too. This is Martin Scorsese in 2016. This is a man who's been directing for decades. And this film feels like somebody who has an amazing hold on storytelling and
Mhm.
themes and filmmaking, to the point where it's just like, this is such a dense and rich film to process and to think about. And that's why I've been thinking about it for 6 years. It's just
and I
like,
hope this has a director's commentary on it, because I've got to listen to that if that's the case.
well, and this is a film that had been trying to make for 20 years.
Right.
He wanted trying to find funding for it. And like Scorsese's at that point in his career.
Right.
Like he's gonna make what he wants
He could
as
have
long as
probably
people give him
personally
money.
funded it.
Yeah.
It's $36 million. I got to think Scorsese has that.
Yeah. And the thing is, it's like what speaks to me so much, because and one of the biggest things that I've gotten from watching all Scorsese's films, and honestly, I've had to rethink my rankings of directors for myself personally after, because like I picked the Coen brothers to start this show because they're my favorites, and they still are. They're still my top directors. Like my sensibilities just align so well with that, and their sense of humor and their perspective. Like it makes sense to me. Kubrick was my number two, and then Nolan, and like I think Scorsese was 5 or 6 for me behind Tarantino. Like after watching all these films, I'm like, I could argue Scorsese's my number 2 favorite director, because I've learned to understand that he kind of speaks for me. Because like, especially watching a lot of his earlier films that were more explicit about, hey, I'm an Italian American, I'm a Roman Catholic, I process guilt. And that Catholic guilt, and coming from like the Northeast, I'm a Jersey boy, he's a New Yorker, and so many of his films speak to me on a certain level. And you can tell like how deeply, because like I'm confirmed Roman Catholic. I would say I'm agnostic at this point. I legitimately get frustrated by the organized religion of Catholicism.
Me too.
Because like
I'm not Catholic. Yeah.
It's like priests have done a lot of bad things.
True. I mean,
and I know way too many people that are like Kichijori.
Yep.
Too many people where it's just like they go to mass every Sunday, they go to confession, but they don't live like a Catholic.
I mean, Don John portrayed that perfectly.
Yes, I love that movie so much. And oh my God, that movie speaks to me. I'm like, oh my God, New Jersey Italian people. But like, that's the thing, because like, I get it. And when I watched Last Temptation of Christ, I'm like, I get this. Like, I get this processing. And like, Kundun, I feel like, is too much of just like a biopic. I don't know if it really dug deep enough, because like it didn't dig deep like Silence, or especially Last Temptation of Christ, in terms of what it's trying to portray in terms of faith. But this film is able to look at will and commitment to what you believe in, and it challenges, it has people who don't understand it. It has people who are ignorant of it. It has people that live contrary to what they say that they believe. And then you have the conflict of the ageless conflict of like, there's other perspectives and religions and faiths in the world. And at the core of this film, it is that conflict between Christianity and Buddhism. And how do you go about it? Because it's like they're both hard-headed like rams ramming into each other. Because the thing is, it's like Rodriguez will not stop trying to convert people, and obviously the Inquisitor is not going to stop until he breaks Rodriguez at this point. And it's so interesting that just listening to them interact with each other, they're just so hard-headed and committed to what they're trying to do, and they're looking at each other in a mirror in many ways. And it's just like, this is why people and families don't get along, because they're like, I can't stand them. It's just like, because you're the same person. And it's like,
Yeah.
it's that kind of conflict, and it's so interesting to watch. And like, there this is like, this isn't flashy quotable, this isn't like
No.
Goodfellas and stuff like that, but this is some of the richest dialogue in a Scorsese film, period, because there's so many things to think about based off of what they say in this film.
Yeah, I'm looking through the IMDb quotes section because I didn't write them down as I was watching it. But like, and I'll just touch on these. But like, to my point earlier about like, potentially, what if Liam Neeson has the same position as Rodriguez? Or one of the first lines that he says to him is that he says, I pray to Rodriguez. It doesn't help, but go on and pray, but pray with your eyes open. Like that. Man, like, if you're part of the church, like, please listen to that. Like, see what's actually going on and do something about it. Like, and I feel like you can interpret that like as him trying to say, this is how you can live. This is how you can, stop the unnecessary sacrifice of a ton of people. Like, we're not gonna, this isn't a winning situation for us. Like, you could, if you take that interpretation, like that speaks to a different level. But there's the kind of the point that you were talking about earlier about how just the difference of the cultures and how the Japanese people here don't see the faith. They see what they kind of want to see. They have a very shallow faith, which is why they're so quick to apostate. But there's as he's giving out all of the like iconography, and he says, I worry they value these poor signs of faith more than faith itself. But how can we deny them? And that's like the struggle, like, as somebody in my role, is like, you worry constantly for people that it's like, are they valuing this too much? Is this heritage? Is this a good feeling? Is this security in what might come in the afterlife? But at the same time, like, even if that is their motivation, like, it's our job to feed them. Like, it's my job to provide spiritual growth. There's surely God heard their prayers as they died, but did he hear their screams? Like, man, that's the kind of dialogue that wins you original screenplay. Well, adapted screenplay. I bought the book after watching this movie. I just haven't read it yet.
Mm-hmm.
I think those were the and even just like Rodriguez's philosophy on martyrdom. He talks about the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church, kind of saying like, if they're going to kill me, like, fine, cool. But then they're like, we've learned, they're like, we know you're cool with that. It strengthens them. We got to break you. And so they're like, we're going to kill a bunch of people needlessly. And there's I thought the martyrdom would be my salvation. Please, God, don't let it be my shame. The Lord is my refuge, my deliverer. Like, just the fear, the anxiety in his voice. Yeah. Something else that I noticed this time around is not only, well, gosh, do you want to talk about let's talk about the community, because I was already just talking about them for a little bit. One thing that's really noticeable is how despairing this movie becomes. It starts off hopeful. It starts off with Rodriguez and Grupe being like, our mentor is there. We refuse to believe that this one piece of slander against him is real.
Mm-hmm.
There's work to be done in Japan. Let's go. And the Syrian Eyes character is like, you ain't going. And they're like, no, but like, we're going. Like, we just need your permission.
Which, side note, that angled shot down at them on those steps as they're walking, just like, I remember seeing that in the trailer, being like, just like, cinematography.
So they get to the island, and they're led by the trader who they're already hesitant about at the beginning. They're questioning him, but all of a sudden they're greeted by this like small host of people that are like, you think that, oh, they're really like dedicated and they're taking this seriously, and they put them up in this hut and all that, and then they get spotted outside, and there's two people that see them, and they wind up being believers as well, and they take them to this village and they spread the gospel, and this whole village comes to know Christ. And then the forces come in and like they have to separate, and it's like, it starts off really positive. It starts off, these guys are doing good work. It starts off all that, but then you see like it's a very shallow faith. It's a faith that continually gets smaller because either people are denouncing and running away and are scared, especially because if we hear this word pariso over and over again, their word for paradise, because that, you're right, that's what they're going for, and they're like, is this pariso now? And it's like, no, that comes later. And they're like, well, all right, well, I'm not waiting. Like, it's just interesting to see that by the end, like, you get the feeling that like there's not a single Christian in Japan, except for Rodriguez. Like, that was really interesting to notice how this movie starts off cautiously optimistic and ends up in a very like, it's not like I said, it's not a happy ending. It's not a hopeful ending. Like, it's bittersweet in a way, because you're like, he suffered, he persevered, he did his role, but it's not a happy ending.
Well, no, and because I feel like the bare minimum that he's able to accomplish in the end is preserving his own faith.
Right.
Which was not the mission. The mission was supposed to spread it.
And I think there's something to be said about that as well. Man, I think there's something to be said about every single like frame of this movie. That's something that I'm wrestling with now. Like, sometimes that's your duty, your responsibility. Like, sometimes that is the victory, is that you persevere, like, or like you've done your part, and like it's those people that are drowned, like those people took the faith seriously till the end. Like, maybe that was your role, and like you've done your best, and like now it's just time for you to come home, like you to experience Pariso. Like, and there's part of me that wonders, since I haven't read the source material, I my understanding is there was an original Japanese film that came out covering this story that was loosely adapted. This one is a more faithful adaptation. I haven't seen the original movie. I haven't read the book yet. I wonder how much influence this is of Scorsese just himself. I mean, this is the first time he's got a screenplay credit in years.
Yeah.
But Scorsese was almost a confirmed priest. Like, he went and like pretty much just before they were going to confirm him, he was like, I'm going to go make movies. Like, because he's talked pretty openly about like he was wrestling with things, and he's a storyteller. Like, you wonder how much of what they're experiencing in this movie is his own, like, especially in Hollywood, like through the 70s, 80s, 90s, aughts, like the fact that he still can make a movie like this that is so deeply personal to his faith, like that's, and come out hopeful at the end of it. Like that's the victory. Like,
yeah. Well, that's if you want to frame it in that context, it's like he's one of the few fighting a very specific fight of what he sees of like trying to preserve cinema and stuff like that. And obviously we could have a whole entire conversation on that. And, every single director ever has been asked to put their input onto this. But this is something that is very obviously very personal, and his own struggle and trying to process things. And, Scorsese always stays committed to himself in his films. Like, there's always his passion there. Even when he's doing like a big budgeted family film like Hugo, there's a love of film and cinema in that film that transcends it just being some family movie. And The Irishman is a contemplation of basically what most people think of his career. It's just like, he's the gangster movie guy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, here's a gangster movie that, like, the last, what, I don't know, 30, 40 minutes of that movie is just like, no, this is sad. This
Man,
is
if I could just like, if The Irishman was just that last 30 or 40 minutes, that would be maybe my favorite of his, but it's the whole thing. It's the whole 4 hours.
70-something-year-old De Niro.
You'll talk about The Irishman in a couple of weeks, but here's the
Yeah.
other thing I find really beautiful about this film is I think that in every scene is intentional. Every scene is trying to say something. Every scene is trying to communicate something. But I think it's specific enough that it feels personal and it feels like Scorsese is trying to convey something. And I think, and I wonder if he's, I don't know, I haven't looked too much into this, but I wonder if Scorsese's trying to say silent about what this movie means to him. And I'm sure he said things, but I'm sure they're vague statements. Because I think he's made a movie that is not just for him and not just for Catholics and not just for Christians and not just for like cinema fans. He's made a movie that I think everybody can connect to in some sort of way. And this was like the really surprising thing to me for a film that is deeply Christian. Now, it's not your like happy Christian film like American Underdog or whatever. Like I looked on my Letterboxd and like several reviews from people that I follow start off by saying like, I got to start off by saying I identify as an atheist, but I love this movie. And it's like, this is a movie about persevering in your faith, specifically for Christianity. And they're like, some of it's just like the cinematography, the gorge, like you can't not rate this a certain level just on like, you know, cinematic achievement, even if I don't identify with it. But it's like, I think everybody can identify to some part of this movie. I think everybody has a different takeaway. And I don't say that about a lot of films, because I think a lot of times it's like either you look into them too much or sometimes not enough, or some of them are meant to be ambiguous and some of them are just like, no, you're just interpreting it wrong. Like, you know, but like, I just love seeing a 4.5-star review from somebody I follow on Letterboxd that just starts off saying, I should emphasize that I'm a staunch atheist, and continues like to praise this movie. And it's like, man.
Well, to be fair, they're believing and not believing.
It's true. Atheism is a belief.
Everybody has a commitment and a faith to something or a belief of something. And even nihilist, you're committing to that perspective on the world,
right?
Even though it's like you're not believing in anything, but like you're still believing and not believing in anything,
right?
And that's the thing about this film is it's like it doesn't have to be about Christianity, it doesn't have to be about Buddhism, it doesn't have to be about any of those things. It's you will find people in your life that will shake your beliefs. They will challenge you. They will put you in situations where you might give up. And this film is about that perseverance. And sometimes what that looks like might not be the thing that you want it to be, but sometimes it's finding the will to just survive with it. And that's Rodriguez by the end of this film, is like he's able to survive throughout the rest of his life, still holding that with him, even if it's not something that he gets to express outwardly. And now, like, I'm starting to really think about what you brought up about Liam Neeson's character too. Obviously, the beginning scene of this film is him.
Yes.
Does he hear the voice? Because, like, obviously, and I thought it was also interesting is Kieran Hines, who does the voice that speaks to Andrew Garfield at that moment. And obviously, that's the moment that really changed it, is he heard that voice. And I know there's that one shot, and like obviously we don't hear what's going on in Liam Neeson's head or anything like that, but like that moment where he falls to his knees, which that was like, I remember that from the trailer being like one of the opening shots, and you're just like, Liam Neeson? Like, this isn't Taken? Which, the side note, that's one of my favorite things about him being in this movie was like, oh my God, he's acting.
Right.
And he's legitimately acting. He has such presence in movies when he is doing that. And I feel like I'm like thinking, is that what happened to him? And if he really is living the same kind of life that Rodriguez is, and Ferrera is still faith in silence, did he hear that voice too? Did that have to inspire him too? Because I felt like that's what inspired Rodriguez. It's like that's the moment where he finally was like, enough is enough.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, we'll never know that. We'll never know what was running through Ferrera's head at the beginning of that film, besides the narration that he has. But like,
I think the more and more I think about it, I think my interpretation is we are meant to immediately think that Liam Neeson does not share that. But the more I think about his arc, I think lives in a very similar way to Rodriguez. Because Rodriguez is very comfortable stepping on the Jesus later and writing the statement, the oath. I think we're meant to believe that he lives in this. But again, I could see the other argument. But it's that little slip of the tongue that kind of tips me off. And then again, kind of tying back earlier of the pray, keep praying, but pray with your eyes open. Like, I think there's just a recognition of the fight is not the fight you thought it was. This is a personal tribulation, not a community trial.
Well, and that's an interesting perspective too, of like Ferrera coming into realizing like that was his purpose.
And I want to also like clarify that like I don't think that's an individual's purpose. I don't think that if you identify as any sort of faith-based, but it's specifically Christianity, I don't think that our purpose is called to go somewhere that you're going to be, have to struggle, right? It could be, right? But if it's struggle for the sake of sharing, I don't think we're called to places to then be told, like, I didn't actually call you here for the community. I called you here for you. And it's like, I think that's what, solitude is, alone time with God. And I think that so I'm not saying we should strive to be like this, but it just feels like they realize the way that we win is to hold strong, and maybe something changes, maybe something doesn't, maybe we've left a piece of iconography that goes somewhere and impacts somebody. Maybe like our stories, some people are like, we got to go find out what happened to them. Maybe our persistence leads to like it's just I'm fast. This is the problem of like only two people on an episode like this, because like I want to hear a ton of perspectives about this film. Like I didn't have time to. I finished this movie like 10 minutes before we started recording. So like
we gotta convince Robert to watch it.
Robert has seen it and loves it.
Yeah.
Adores it. So like, I want to hear Robert's thoughts. I want to hear, looking at some of my Letterboxd people, like Rowan hasn't seen it, Heath hasn't seen it, or at least according to Letterboxd, like, like Nash, these are some SiftPop writers, but like, I want to know, like, what does Vincent think about it? I'm trying to think of non-SiftPop people. What is people that are outside of my culture? One of my favorite things about doing the Writers Room podcast is that I regularly interact with people outside of my culture, and I get to hear different perspectives. It's like, I feel like a movie like this is just meant for that. Like, and we seem to be coming at it from a pretty similar place, which is also like, both of us are recognizing that there is not necessarily one interpretation of this film. I think the broader message is persistence through suffering, faithfulness through suffering. I think that's the broad message. Rodriguez makes it. He experiences, Pariso after the end of this movie. But I think a lot of the smaller messages and situations are meant to be explored more. So,
Mhm.
yeah. So man, that's I would not, I would have not been mad if this was a panel of like 8 people.
It's
But yeah.
like now I'm thinking like this because like I do a movie club every month and there's 6 of us,
Man.
and like we've done some interesting because like we've done like Barry Lyndon, we've done he did Lilo and Stitch recently for its 20th anniversary. We
Nice.
just talked about Ordinary People,
Yeah.
and we're going to be talking about adaptation. It's going to be very interesting. And like this would have been such an interesting conversation. Like, and like I'm obviously coming from it because like it's all about the suffering, that Roman Catholic perspective, and it's just like it's that intensity of like, you watch a lot of early Scorsese, and it's all about Catholic guilt.
Mm-hmm.
Like Mean Streets has tons of it. Is That Knocking at My Door has tons of it. And throughout his career, obviously he has very overt films like this, but then there's other films where it's always under the surface. It's like you make a movie about Italian Americans, there's always going to be the Roman Catholic aspect of it.
Right.
It's so like entrenched in it. And you feel that in Goodfellas, you feel that in Casino. Like there's just those elements, especially Goodfellas.
Yeah.
There's always that. And this is so interesting because this is like obviously there's different ways of approaching the I've been sitting here this whole entire episode blanking on what the hell the word is for people who go and try to convert people to other religions.
Oh, missionaries.
Missionaries. Like obviously there's other approaches to this. Just look at Trey Parker and Matt Stone, because Book of Mormon is all about that. And obviously they take a very different approach.
But I think there's also a really interesting metaphor, like message here, which is similar to what the Book of Mormon says, and similar to a lot of criticisms of like Christian mission trips, is that people go and they stay for a week and they help out and they leave. Like, and I think this movie is saying like they come, they speak of paradise because like you're here for like let's get the essentials out of the way, but that's the only thing that people latch onto, and like so it results in them having shallow faith. Most of them, some of them have very deep faith, and so it's that really interesting. You wonder, knowing what they know, would Rodriguez and Garupe still go? Like, is it worth it for them to go? And gosh, what a oh.
Well, because like
You
obviously
think no, but then you think like he Garupe, at least for sure in his death scene, like is all in. Like, man.
and that was such an like how that scene's all set up so interesting because we just see him from such a distance, and we never get that last goodbye between those two characters. It's just like we're voyeuristically just watching him sacrifice himself.
And where we left off from him was they were splitting.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's the end of his journey. While we're speaking of the two of them, this is the other thing I wrote down. One of the things watching this on a rewatch, the first time I watched this movie, I was like, oh, Liam Neeson's barely in this movie. And Andrew Garfield, or in Adam Driver, is also not very much in this movie. So, this is definitely a Andrew Garfield performance-driven film. And that's totally fine, especially when he's this good. But what was really interesting to me to see was I remembered that Andrew Garfield made it to the end. It's really hard to forget that final shot of this film.
Yeah.
So knowing that's where we're going, what's the journey to get there, reminding me of all the steps that we take. It's so easy to see like Andrew Garfield, Rodriguez is the one in the beginning who's pushing for them to go to Japan.
Yeah.
And Garupe is just kind of along for the ride. He's the one doing all the leading. They eventually get to the hut. And when they're staying, like Garupe is the one who suggests, let's go out. Like let's leave the hut. And there's almost a will that you can almost see there, like Rodriguez is willing to suffer for longer than Garupe is.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also the, like, as soon as people come knocking at the door, Rodriguez is the one that like wants to go jump at it, like, because he's the, you know, I've got to jump on any opportunity I can. So it's they're almost completely opposite at the very end of the film, of their particular stories, because, you know, Rodriguez is the one that he has to remain silent, you know, to avoid the suffering of others. You know, he no longer can be the kind of person he was, and Garupe is more passionate in that last scene than he ever is. Like,
Yep.
you know, and it would, and then what do each of them get for it? Like,
Yeah, and don't go into this movie thinking this is going to be like a feel-good faith-based film, and that's such an interesting thing because like faith-based films have a very bad connotation now, and I feel like a lot of them are cheap, cheesy, and just beat you over the head with the message. They talk about so much faith in this film, but I never feel like the screenplay is beating me over the head with anything.
mm-hmm.
And like even the interpreter is just dropping nonstop exposition and thematic exposition, but like it feels so entwined and natural in the story that it never feels like it takes me out of it. And you know, my perspective on Christian films, like they don't make them like they used to, and I just think of things like Ben-Hur, which like is one of my favorite films of all time, and is literally the tale of the Christ, and it's such an important faith-based film, and like that won 11 Oscars and was one of the biggest films of all time at that point. Is like, and now is a Christian film if you think about it that way. And I find it so interesting how our society and like film world has changed over the years, because like unless it's like a Kirk Cameron
Right,
or like like now I'm trying to remember the brothers that do some of these movies, and like I think American Underdog was probably one of the most tame in terms of not beating you over the head with faith in it but still feeling like faith-based film. But like Scorsese just does it different. Like you watch his faith-based films and like there's a completely different edge and perspective on it.
you know, it might be my favorite faith-based film of the last, let's say, decade, is Sound of Metal, because it's not portrayed as a faith-based film,
Mm-hmm.
but the ending relies so much on that. And it's because of a brief conversation that he has with Paul Raci earlier about the silence, the stillness. That's where you experience the kingdom of God. And like, it's clearly meant to be the start of a journey.
Yeah.
But you know, he's very staunchly atheistic at the very beginning, and it's about these Christian people that have come alongside to help this community, and about how just their kindness has penetrated his soul. And like, he makes a mistake and then he just goes, sits in busy and just experiences the kingdom of heaven. As man, that's when we did movies featuring Judeo-Christianity at SiftPop, I put it on the suggested list because I was like, I think this movie has to be about that. Like,
Yeah.
it's not, but it has to be.
Well, and you know, it's like obviously some stories are a lot more overt than others. Like, you know, you
Yeah,
watch
yeah.
the 10 Commandments and it's just like, no crap.
Right.
It's like a Bible
Yeah.
story.
Well, and that's what's like, it's the subtlety that makes that so well. And it doesn't beat anybody over the head, but it gets its message across effectively. Yeah.
And like, if you ever want to feel a deep thematic ride when it comes to faith and want to do a crazy double feature, this and Last Temptation of Christ is going to take you on a journey. And it's so interesting because I read a whole entire book on Scorsese earlier this year, and all the sections talking about Last Temptation of Christ, because this book ended, it was published in like 93 or something, 94. So like it ended with Cape Fear, which I'm like, sequel. I want the rest of his career. I want to read from this author about like the rest of Scorsese's career. But like listening to like, it was hard for him to have people say horrible things about him and his faith because of Last Temptation of Christ, when like this film is about his faith. And it's not like Martin Scorsese isn't a religious man, like he is. It's just, you know, he makes films that it's okay to challenge yourself and try to process things. And like that's one thing that you could always say about Scorsese is like his films will challenge you.
Mhm.
In many ways, he's known for challenging you narratively and character wise because he puts you in the shoes of some despicable people. But some of his most challenging films are like this and Last Temptation of Christ, where it puts you into a very flawed human character trying to navigate an expectation of purity. And where it's just like, and that's why it's so interesting, like his portrayal of Jesus is like of a human and not like he's just a human being dealing with stuff. And like obviously that was one of the biggest reasons why people got very upset about that film, was because he was portraying Jesus as like an actual human being who has vanity and urges and stuff like that. And obviously here it's like Rodriguez is stubborn, he's hard-headed, and it's gonna keep trying. And in the end, that persistence saved him.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess, Aaron, do you have any other thoughts that you wanted to talk about in terms of Silence?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is a really hard movie to actually talk about. Like, I was expecting it to be easier, but like, it's not easy to talk about because it wrestles with a lot. This is a movie of wrestling. I think that one of the Letterboxd people I follow said it best when it's like, this is a war movie. And I love that perspective. But like, part of that wrestling match or war is like, this is a really experiential film that if you're for some reason watching and haven't seen it, like your best thing is just to watch this movie and dedicate your time to paying attention and experiencing it, and you will probably have something more to add to the conversation. And if you've seen this film, you're probably like screaming at the top of your lungs at your computer, like, why are they not bringing up this? And it's like, it's because there's so much here, and because there's really not much definitive about this film in terms of like thematic and story and, you know, all that stuff. We've kind of explored like the definitive is this is a movie about suffering, but like, yeah, what else? Like, this is a movie about persistence, specifically in faith. And so there's lots to take away from this film. And I think I just want to say, just leave that at that. And gosh, this is a film that would be perfect to show a small group, to show a movie club. Like this is the perfect kind of movie where you're like, let's watch this and then like, you know, get some beers and talk about it, or have some coffee and talk about it. Like this is the perfect kind of movie to like, you need to spend more time talking about this movie than you do watching it, because I have a good thing. Most people react to this movie differently, but everybody I know just loves it, and it's got a really high Letterboxd aggregate. Like, I know it's not just the people I know love this movie. Mm-hmm. It's lots of people love this movie, and this is a kind of movie that everybody can walk away looking for something differently. So I guess I'll transition us to just say it's a pity that we haven't talked, or at least specifically said, that this is maybe the most gorgeous film that Scorsese's ever done. No, I'll say that it is the best looking film he's ever done. This movie has an emphasis on cinematography, and I don't know that I can say that about any of the other ones that I've seen. Again, I haven't seen Last Temptation, or I think some of his earlier stuff, but this film's gorgeous.
I think with Scorsese, a lot of the times the most prominent cinematography that stands out is camera movement.
Yeah, right.
And
which is also present here. Like the scene where you're in the prison with Andrew Garfield watching through the bars, like that camera movie, like that's all still here too, but like,
yeah,
there's some gorgeous shots.
The lighting, the framing, how they choose to present certain things from a certain distance. Like there is something like, and that's why this got nominated for best cinematography and why Rodrigo Prieto was such a great inspired addition, because I just feel like I have to give these special shout outs every time, because Thelma Schoonmaker edits every single one of Scorsese's films, and his films are always perfectly paced, edited so perfectly. And you have cinematography here, because Rodrigo Prieto did Brokeback Mountain and Babel and Argo. His first film with Scorsese was Wolf of Wall Street. He did The Irishman. I'm interested to see if he's shooting. We almost have the same birthday.
The new Scorsese one, the
Killers of the Flower Moon.
Knew it had something with a flower in it.
Yep, he is shooting Killers of the Flower Moon, which at some point at the end of this year, I'll also be doing that one.
Nice.
Because like that's my plan, is if the directors that I've done have a new movie, like it's interesting because I'll be finishing up Spielberg and the Fablemans will already have been out. So then I could just tack that on at the end.
There you go.
And then at the end of this year, I'll be doing probably an episode about the Killers of the Flower Moon, probably with Jess, because she loves her Westerns. And I'm very interested to see Scorsese do a Western. And that's the thing. Scorsese doesn't just do gangster movie, people.
It's true. We just only know him for his gangster movies, but
which is a shame, because so many great films here. Just like ask Robert, After Hours.
Silence might be his best made film. Like, I mean, it's got all of his things. It's got the gorgeous cinematography. Look, I personally think, I don't adore this movie because I think it could be slightly shorter. And I know I said that earlier that like the runtime is a positive for me because it's meant to be like a long and brooding movie, but it's like, because it's long and brooding, I don't want to revisit it. Like, except for like once every 6 years would be good,
Well, and I think too, the subject matter is like, this is gonna put you through a ringer.
Yeah.
To watch this movie, and I don't think most people want to go through that.
No, this is one of those movies that you have to prepare to be like, I'm gonna sit down and watch a almost 3-hour movie about people that suffer like for most of the runtime, like especially right when things start to get good, all of a sudden they're going to take a hard right turn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and there is some brutal Scorsese violence, like beheadings and stuff like that. That's going to happen too. Yeah, so yeah, this is a rated R movie. This it's that. And special shout out to Jay Cox as well, who wrote the film with Scorsese, who previously done The Age of Innocence and Gangs in New York with him.
Nice.
Which I do feel like this is a much more cohesive and cleaned up screenplay than Gangs in New York, because like there's just so much going on in that movie. But this is a very interesting and special kind of film, and if you haven't seen Silence, go check it out. Apparently it's on Epix right now.
I have the Blu-ray, so
I have it on physical media. It's sitting right over there. So there you go. Now, final segment of the show, which is recommendations. So, Aaron, what would you like to recommend our lovely audience?
We'll talk about a movie I know you've seen, that I'd never heard of. It's called Beyond the Infinite 2 Minutes. So I don't want to say anything about it because it's kind of one of those movies. Like, I want to tell you about how I was introduced to this movie. I did the Oscars weekend, it was Oscars weekend last weekend. So I went over to Aaron Dicer's house and we watched all 10 Best Picture nominees from Friday night to Sunday night. So after watching Coda, Belfast, Licorice Pizza, West Side Story,
Nightmare
Alley. I'm trying to think of the order. Oh shoot, what was that middle Saturday one? Don't Look Up. That was it. Yeah. After watching all those and then going to dinner and then seeing Dune, he was like, hey, stick around. I've got this film to show you. We're going to start it at like 10 o'clock at night after we watched a bunch of movies. and we're all tired because we've been watching movies, nothing but movies, and not getting a ton of sleep. And I'm not going to tell you even what the movie is. I'm just going to put it on. And he puts this movie on, and we're immediately captivated. I will say it's a time loop movie, but it's
Yes.
also a time loop movie like you've never seen before. It's hilarious. It has really interesting thought experiments. It maybe goes on a little too long, but this is a perfect movie. I would say grab a friend.
I see
You could watch
Dicer
it.
just put this on Letterboxd.
You could watch it yourself, but I was in a group full of people, and just like get a group full of people that have never heard of this movie. Don't tell them anything about it. Just say we're watching a time loop movie. Don't look about anything about it. You can catch it on any of your streamers, like it's on Vudu. It's like $10 to buy, so you're staying stuff. Don't tell them anything about it. Just say we're watching a time loop movie. It's only like 70 minutes. I promise you'll have a good time.
Yeah, I'm double checking here. It's in my top 40 so far of 2022.
But did it
And
only get wide released this year?
yep, at least in
Okay.
America.
Got it. Because Dicer said it was a 2020 film, and it is listed as 2020, but
Because I'm pretty sure that's when it actually came out internationally, but it didn't actually get released until it came out here because like I got a screener for this.
looks like it was also at
Fortunately,
Fantasia Fest last year.
and this I've seen 190 films or so far this year. This is pretty high up there. It was a crazy ride. Oh my god. I remember popping this in and being like, what's this? And it just keeps going and you're just like, what is this?
And you're like, how long can this concept play out with what it's set up as? And then they add a layer, and you're like, oh well, that opens up a whole new door. It's almost like the MCU, right? Where you're like, how long can this really last? And then they're like, and here's Doctor Strange. So now magic exists, and you're like, I guess, like.
Oh, that I'm glad you brought that up because that's so interesting that you all just randomly watch that. Who was at the Oscars this year?
Keith, Jonathan Watkins, and Ian,
Okay.
and then my wife.
My
wife.
My wife. So my recommendation, so I didn't watch anything off of my watch list. I was pretty busy this weekend, so I didn't get around to doing that. But I did rewatch one of my movies, and this was very fitting because I had just done a podcast with the Infinity Film Podcast with my buddies Rod and Ben, and we ranked Adam McKay films. And I just threw Talladega Nights in there where I did because I'm like, I haven't watched this in years. And so I rewatched Talladega Nights this weekend. Oh my God. It's so endlessly quotable and stupid. And it just feels like a movie that came out at that time because like all the gay jokes and stuff like that, like this wouldn't this definitely would have been different in 2022 if Adam McKay made this today. But like Ricky Bobby.
But we need these kind of movies too. Like we need
Yeah, this is why I want Adam McKay to go make movies like this again.
We need
Ferrell
these
needs
hot
you.
rod, mildly offensive, sometimes pretty like we don't want to
I
make.
wanted my kids to be a couple of pansies. I want to name them Dr. Quinn and Medicine Woman.
We look, and this is that other thing is like you don't want to make offensive content, but like if you're gosh, it was totally fine in 2006 when this came out, like totally fine. But like it's not, some of the stuff that happens is not now, and it's because it shows that we as a society have grown. And two is he was pushing the line, and that's always like the funnest kind of comedy.
Well, that's the thing. Adam McKay is always going to push the lines,
right?
And like, there's so many Adam McKay movies I could just endlessly quote. And Rod got so upset with me because I put The Other Guys as my number one because like I just love that movie. It's like, we will have sex in your Prius again. And just like, oh my, one of my favorite memes of the Will Smith slap. It's like, you will not put my wife's name in your effing female, and it cuts to her name is Christina, and you'll get my wife's name right. And I'm just like, oh my god. Oh, so like if you just want to laugh, just pop in any Adam McKay movie pre-Big Short. The Big Short.
I mean, The Big Short will make you laugh too, and
well, that would also depress you. So,
that's true.
like,
Well, and same with Don't Look Up, but like we laughed a lot during Don't Look Up.
oh my god. So like if you want to watch one that's not going to depress you by the end on top of it, just watch some one of those. And then there's two horror films that I really wanted to put a quick spotlight on that came out on VOD this past weekend. You Are Not My Mother, which is a really creepy, unnerving, like haunting film about this young woman whose mother disappears and then comes back and is like not the same. And like
kind of like an About Time.
So like this the mother comes back and you don't know if it's actually her mother or not. Changeling kinds of things, and it's unnerving, it's creepy, and
like an Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Kind of, you're not sure.
I don't know. It like because it's an Irish folk horror, so it's like really which is so funny because I just read a whole entire book on fairy tales and folk tales of Ireland, and it's just like changelings. So like it was, I'm like, wait a minute, I just read about this. And so like that one's definitely very creepy and ominous and haunting and eerie. And the other one's All My Friends Hate Me. And this is legitimately one of the most socially uncomfortable movies I've watched in a long time. Like you're just sitting there cringing at the uncomfortable social interactions that are going on in this movie. This young British man who has a reunion with his friends from college for the first time in years for his birthday weekend. And basically it feels like you're being gaslit the whole entire time that he's a horrible person. Everybody hates him, and you're just like, it has a great sense of humor about it, and it just builds and builds to this point where it's just like, oh my god, what the hell is going on in this movie? So like these are two like small VOD releases that came out this past weekend, and the All My Friends Hate Me one, I think my video is up to almost 400 views already. I'm like, that one struck a chord. So it's like especially the All My Friends Hate Me, it's a different kind of horror movie, and like I think that's an interesting fresh take on it. Like the other one is definitely a horror movie, so like you're gonna be, and it feels like that creepy eerie A24 kind of horror movie kind of thing. So those are my recommendations, so
nice,
check them out, and then have a palate cleanser after and just watch Talladega Nights. But Aaron, thank you so much as always. I really enjoy having you on here as a collaborator, and I always love popping onto the podcast, and go check out Alice, Aaron, and I redoing the Oscars for last year for 3 hours.
It's true. I think we did good. Thank you for having me.
We made ours shorter. The actual Oscars didn't.
It's true.
But thank you as always, and thank all of you for always tuning in and supporting your Wasteland Reviewer.